How do you do? Jen and Cam feel it would be unkind to present this program without a friendly word of warning. We are about to unfold our true crime podcast, a podcast of lifelong friends who seek to examine crimes which were committed without reckoning upon God. The discussion will be frank, and the subject matter will be of a grim and violent nature. I think it will thrill you. It might even horrify you. So, if there are young children listening, or if you feel unwilling to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. By the time everybody's listening to this, I've just gotten back from my vacation, and I hope I had a good time.
I bet you had a marvelous time.
I bet you I did, too.
Florida is so nice this time of year. Is it Florida,
Actually,
Texas, whatever
it's Florida. It's Florida. Actually, we looked at the weather last night, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be too bad. But
see, that's
we
good.
shall see.
Here you have a humdinger of a case here.
It's a big one. So settle in. Everybody settle in.
Put your seatbelts on. Get a little blankie if it's cold at your parts.
My bird chaser, Chad, has followed me into the studio today, so let's hope that he behaves himself. So if you hear anything, I might scream, "Damn it, Chad!" You'll know that that's who it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready?
I am so ready. Let's go.
On a flat and lonely stretch of highway in San Joaquin County, California, in February of 2012, onlookers were horrified as a backhoe violently tore into an abandoned well nicknamed Loren's Boneyard. The giant claws of the backhoe rose up out of the ground, holding a massive amount of dirt and the skeletal remains of the victims buried within. Now broken and in disarray, the bones fell from the claws like garbage. A woman's jacket was discovered with part of an arm still lodged within. Scoop after scoop, pile after pile, broken bones littered the area. The only witness to the first crimes that occurred at the well on the flood road were the Sierra Nevada foothills watching in the distance and the copse of tall trees. For the second crime, an entire television audience, including the mother and sister of one of the victims, witnessed the remains fall from the clutches of the backhoe onto the ground. In the autumn of 1971, two boys who lived in the tiny town of Linden, California, in picturesque San Joaquin County, would start school together. Loren Herzog was born in December of 1965 to a middle-class family, and Wesley Shermantine, Jr., born in February of 1966, lived across from each other on Fine Road and had been friends since they were 3 years old. Described as being closer than brothers, the two would do everything together, including many hunting and fishing trips that Shermantine's father would take them on. There wasn't a fishing hole around that the two hadn't visited. Loren, the son of Jerry and Malvi Herzog, was remembered as quiet, tow-headed, the type of boy that every mother would love. His mother was a school secretary and taught sewing in her home with the 4-H club. And by many accounts, she was referred to as, quote, the nicest person. As Loren got older, he was given the nickname of Slim because he was tall and lanky. Easygoing and humorous, he was considered the typical, laid-back local boy by many. Wesley was sandwiched between two sisters, Barbara and Dolly. He was a braggart, a bully, he talked back to the teachers, and had a temper with a short fuse. Many would get nervous just by his presence on the school bus. His father, Wesley Shermantine Sr., owned a construction company, and his wife, Sue, was a violent alcoholic. Life in the Shermantine household was inconsistent at best. Their dad, who made good money, would shower them with expensive gifts like a go-kart and horses, and he made sure that they wanted for nothing. Wesley Jr. even got a brand new car when he turned 16, and the first thing he did was take his lifelong friend, Loren Herzog, for a ride. However, Shermantine's mother, Sue, was prone to violent outbursts and verbally and physically abused the children. Dally claims her mother even broke her nose on one occasion. The Shermantines had devised a cruel form of punishment for Wesley Jr. They would make him stand still while they shot bullets at his feet.
Ugh.
It's sweet, right?
Ugh.
When a customer of the Shermantines was late paying his bill, Sue Shermantine, she's charming, took a bulldozer to the man's house while he was sleeping.
Oh.
She narrowly missed killing him. The man never filed a complaint, and even though the police knew what had happened, the matter was dropped. And
he was probably scared.
I know.
Like,
the matter was dropped.
Bulldoze your house.
Mm-hmm.
Like, come on.
No charges were ever filed against Sue. Loren and Wesley graduated from high school in 1984 and moved in together in an apartment in Stockton, California. Even though it's believed the pair's life of violence started a few years before they graduated, it was the life unsupervised with easy access to drugs that would eventually lead to a 15-year crime spree, leaving devastated families in their wake. Just how many people would eventually succumb to their twisted and sadistic crimes is still unknown. It's hard to believe that Linden, California, best known for its annual cherry festivals, and it's surrounded by acres of farmland and it's got rows of fruit trees, would be anything other than a carbon copy of Mayberry, North Carolina. But, like many areas in the U.S. during the 1980s, San Joaquin County had a serious drug problem. One of the biggest problems they had was meth, also called crank by the locals. Now, methamphetamine is derived from chemicals rather than from plant or agricultural products and was used throughout the 1950s and 60s in prescription form in the U.S., mainly for weight control, narcolepsy, and depression. Predictably, restrictions on the chemicals used to produce the drug in the 70s coincided with the decline in use. However, in the 80s, it made a comeback with a vengeance, utilized by homemade recipes and backyard cooks. We know about those cooks here in Missouri.
We do. I didn't know. I didn't know that, the weight loss thing. I always thought it was kind of a new thing.
In September of 1984, Herzog and Shermantine drove up to visit a casino in Lake Tahoe. On their way home, they came upon a parked car on the side of Highway 88 in Alpine County. Inside was 41-year-old Henry Howell. He had had too much to drink and just decided to pull over to sleep it off rather than to continue driving drunk. Howell, from Santa Clara, had one son and was a member of the Lummi Nation, a Native American tribe that is indigenous to the Puget Sound area of Washington state. Howell's body was found relatively quickly by police. He had been shot in the head and robbed of approximately $11.
What?
He lost
thought for
his
sure you were
life
going to
for
say
$11.
like 1,100 or something.
No, $11.
Wow.
On the 27th of November, 1984, Shermantine and Herzog were out driving the back roads drinking and getting high on crack. They saw a 1982 Pontiac parked on Daggett Road off Highway 4 on Roberts Island. Roberts Island is an island on the San Joaquin River Delta. Inside, two men, Howard King, 35, from Lathrop, and a drifter named Paul Cavanaugh, aged 31. Their bodies were still warm when police found them lying next to the car with their pockets turned inside out. They both had sustained fatal gunshot wounds. The only real evidence left at the crime scene were tire impressions. And around the time of the crime occurred, a woman was driving on her way home, and she noticed a red pickup truck that was backed into a parking space near San Joaquin River Bridge. As she passed the vehicle, it pulled out and drove behind her. Worried that she was being followed, she headed towards the county jail, which is a very smart move, but then noticed that the vehicle had turned off. Thinking she was safe, she went ahead and drove home. Her house sat about a mile off the road, and as she turned into her driveway, she saw headlights behind her. As soon as she reached the house, she scrambled indoors as fast as she could. From her window, she saw a red pickup truck backing out and leaving.
So it was a truck with lights?
The same truck that was
following her, but they're impersonating a police officer?
She noticed a red pickup truck that was backed into the parking space. Yes, as she was driving by, she noticed the red truck. And she passed the vehicle. And then it pulled out and drove behind her. And she worried that she was being followed. She went towards the jail. The truck pulled away, turned. So she thought she was safe. But when she turned into her driveway, she saw the truck again. The next day is when she heard about the homicides, and she called the police. They came out and took impressions of the tire tracks that the truck had left behind in her driveway. Later, those would match the murder scene of King and Cavanaugh. Wesley Shermantine told his mother-in-law that he and Herzog had happened upon the crime scene and stopped to see if the, quote, 2 black guys laying on the ground were breathing. His mother-in-law prophetically told him that he probably should have reported it because now his shoe and tire prints would be at the scene. Mm-hmm. Less than a month later, 19-year-old brown-haired, brown-eyed Kimberly Ann Billy would go missing. She was last seen on the 11th of December, 1984. Apparently, Kimberly didn't live near her family, but when she failed to contact anybody over the Christmas holidays, her grandmother feared that something was wrong and reported her missing. 6 months after that, on August 29th, 1985, Joanne Hobson, a petite 16-year-old from East Stockton, was getting ready for a date. Joanne was feisty, outgoing, and energetic. Her mother, Joan Shelley, worked the graveyard shift at the cannery because the shift paid the most money, and being a single mom, of course, don't really have much choice. You need the money. That night at home with Joanne was her sister Michelle. Her sister Sandra was at a friend's house. In an interview, her mother described Joanne as a free spirit, a trusting girl who loved animals and nature. She was nicknamed Smurf by her friends because she was cute and freckled and only 4 feet 8 inches tall. In fact, she was so small, she only weighed 80 pounds, that she could sit inside the bathroom sink and put her makeup on using the mirror above the vanity.
Oh,
little
teeny.
Thing. As Joanne was getting ready for her date, her sister Michelle inquired as to who she was going out with. Joanne told her that it was nobody she knew, but described him as tall and blonde. Later, that night when Michelle got up around 11 o'clock, she found that Joanne was asleep in her bed with the window open. It appeared as though Joanne wasn't going on her date after all, so Michelle covered her up and shut the window. When Joanne came home the next morning, she ate breakfast and then checked on the girls. Joanne was not in her room and the window was open, which was, Michelle said, that was weird. Joanne must have gone out on her date, but she didn't know who the date was with. As the day wore on and Joanne didn't come home, panic began to set in. But as Mrs. Shelley put it, quote, in those days, you had to wait 72 hours before you could report anybody missing. So she waited. In the meantime, she sent her daughters out to look for Joanne. They went around to all her friends' houses, but nobody had seen her. When she was finally able to report her daughter missing, the police told Joan Shelley that her daughter was what? A runaway. And no matter, we hear it all the time. And no matter how much Joan insisted that Joanne was not a runaway, they wouldn't listen. Even Michelle tried to convince them, saying, quote, no girl runs away without her underwear, curling iron, or makeup. But the police were having none of it.
Plus, I think, and we've said this, as a parent, you kind of know. We all know who kind of might do that and kind of might not. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Eventually, Detective Little showed up at Joanne's house and spoke with Michelle and Miss Shelley. At the time, nobody knew that Robin Armtrout, age 24, would also never again be seen alive. Her disappearance would not be reported until September 5th, 1985. But many believe she went missing on the same day as Joanne. So when Detective Little finally interviewed Michelle and Joan, he had come to suspect that the people responsible for Joanne's disappearance were Loren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine. Detective Little decided to withhold any information about Joanne going on a date from the public. It's thought that Robin Armtrout and Joanne Hobson actually had a double date with Herzog and Shermantine. Robin was last seen getting into a red pickup truck with 2 men near Del Mar Park. Robin was a, quote, fire-haired beauty who loved animals and babies, according to her sister Candy Enos. Sadly, she suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder that the family said was brought on by a horrible childhood illness. Robin would bathe 3 times a day, and she would brush her teeth to the point of abrasion, chipping off the enamel.
Ugh.
She married at the age of 17 and then divorced and then married a second time to Richard Armtrout. Unfortunately, that marriage also ended in divorce. Her sister Candy said that all Robin really wanted in life was to find love and to have a baby. But without any professional help for her disorder, she turned to drugs to try to cope, which eventually led to sex work when she no longer had money for her addiction. Robin was a fighter, but she was also extremely kind. She was generous to everybody she met, even strangers. Right before she went missing, she spent the day with her sister. They ate a meal, and afterwards, Cindy helped Robin wash her hair. Robin had carved obscene, self-inflicted tattoos on her abdomen and wrists, and when Cindy asked her why she had done that, Robin simply replied, quote, "I don't know. I was drunk at the time." As Robin left Candy's house that day, Candy offered to drive her home or to have her husband drive her home, but Robin refused. Quote, "I can take care of myself," she said. Robin's naked body would be found face down about 2 weeks later near Potter's Creek, just outside of Linden. She had been raped and stabbed 46 times. Her clothes were found in a neat little pile next to her body, and due to the condition of her remains, her self-inflicted tattoos are what helped identify her. Chevelle Yvonne Wheeler, age 16, was born on the 27th of October, 1968. Named after the Chevrolet muscle car and nicknamed Chevy, she had been born a preemie and had to stay in the hospital for over a month. Her parents were Paula and Raymond, and she loved to work on cars with her dad. He would ask her for a certain size wrench, and she'd go get it for him. At the time she went missing, she was a junior at Franklin High School in Stockton, California. She had not taken school very seriously up until this point, and she would skip school very often. But starting her junior year, she decided that she really wanted to graduate with her friends, so she started taking her academic career a little more seriously. Chevy was no stranger to Shermantine and Herzog. In fact, she'd been hanging around Wesley, who was 3 years older. When Raymond Wheeler caught sight of a gun in Wesley Shermantine's vehicle, he asked Shermantine, "Why the gun? Why do you need a gun?" Wes said it was for protection. And it was at that point that Raymond Wheeler discouraged his daughter from hanging out with Wesley. But, as we know, teenagers don't always listen to their parents.
No, they don't. Ever.
And on the 16th of October, 1985, Chevy decided to skip school and go swimming with Wesley. Paula, her mom, dropped Chevy off at school like in a normal day, and Chevy said, "I love you, Mom," and she got out of the car. Chevy tried to enlist others to go with her to the Valley Springs to swim, but however, none of her friends wanted to go. So before Chevy snuck out of school to wait outside for Shermantine to pick her up, she told a few of her friends that if she didn't return, to tell her dad that she'd left with Wes and this is where we're going. So she, I guess, kind of knew what was going to happen. Or thought so. Or suspected. I don't know. When she didn't come home that night, her sister Marnie told them that Wes Shermantine had called for Chevy the day before. Paula Wheeler decided to call every Shermantine in the phone book, but she said nobody would admit to knowing a Wesley Shermantine. But Paula still left a message with each one saying that if they did, for some reason, suddenly remember who a Wesley Shermantine was, to please tell him that Chevy Wheeler's parents were looking for him. Wes Shermantine showed up at their doorstep the next day and told them that he had gone deer hunting that day and he hadn't seen Chevy. Paula and Raymond made him take off his shirt because they wanted to see if he had any scratches.
That's smart.
Mm-hmm. He agreed.
I don't know if I'd think that. I don't think I would
wouldn't
think
either.
that.
I would never ask a stranger to remove their shirt. I mean, that would be the last thing in my mind. He did. He removed his shirt, but he didn't have any marks on him. The Wheelers reported Chevy missing, and the police told them what? That she had probably run away. And that they couldn't do anything for 30 days.
What?
30 days.
If she ran 30 days, she could be in Europe. Like who?
She could be anywhere in 30 days. Why 30 days? I have no clue. I wasn't able to find out that information.
No.
Maybe somebody knows. Maybe they can tell me. Maybe I wasn't looking
30
in the correct
hours,
spots.
maybe. Back in the day, it used to be 24, but really?
72, yeah. Eventually, a search warrant was issued for Wesley Shermantine's family cabin, which was about 40 miles from Stockton. In San Andreas, Calaveras County, the police found blood and blonde hair. They also found the same evidence in Wesley's vehicle. Unfortunately, as we all know, in 1985, they only had blood typing. They can only tell what kind of blood.
DNA.
They can only prove that the blood type was type A, and that happened to be the same type of blood that Chevy had. But there was no way to determine that the blood was Chevy's. Shermantine was not charged in the disappearance of Chevy Wheeler, even though he remained their only suspect for the next 14 years. Although there were plenty of times that the speed freak killers would brag about being able to make a person disappear, or that they preferred to hunt, quote, the ultimate hunt, humans.
Oh.
And even though they were often seen with blood on them, and even though they were the last people seen with the individuals who had gone missing, There were no charges, no surveillance, nothing was ever done.
Just a winky dink.
Very strange, unfortunate coincidences.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Now, most people think that the disappearance of Chevy Wheeler signifies the end of a spree of violence perpetrated by Shermantine and Herzog until 1998. But it's not. There's a slew of abductions and rapes that happened during this time, and these are just ones that are known about. And while these victims didn't disappear, what they endured was terrifying. Shermantine's own sister, Dolly, claims that Loren Herzog raped her when she was in the 6th grade. Natalie Witt, who went to school with Herzog and Shermantine, has said that Loren had been her first boyfriend when she was in 6th grade, and he was in 7th. She described Loren Herzog as being kind of the wimpier of the two, and that he would do whatever Shermantine told him to do. In fact, on one occasion, Shermantine punched her in the nose, and Herzog did absolutely nothing about it, even though, she was his girlfriend. At one point, Herzog tried to rape her, while Shermantine told her, quote, "You want it." She was desperately crying no, that she didn't want it. And when Herzog finally stopped, she was just hysterical. And finally, thank God, he stopped. She never spoke to either one of them again. In 1991, Linda Mcclung claims that she was abducted and raped by 2 men, who she believed was Shermantine and Herzog. In August of 1993, Wes had given Anita Shaw money to pay a bill for him, and for some reason he became convinced that she kept the money for herself. He beat her and made her strip naked in front of his family because he thought that she was hiding money somewhere on her.
Oh.
He ended up holding her captive for 2 days. Anita was too scared to report it at the time. She's also one of the people who reported Shermantine and a man named Mark Hicks as to both showing up at a bar in San Andreas with blood on their shoes and clothing.
Nobody thought that was weird that they're walking around with blood on them? Like,
they're hunters. That's the only thing I can think of. But there's a whole bunch of things that fell through the cracks here. Not sure it wasn't intentional. Let's just put it that way. In 1994, Fiza Muhammad had been driving along the road when Wesley Shermantine used his truck to purposefully rear-end her car. When she went to exchange insurance information, Shermantine grabbed her around the waist and threw her into his truck. He kept shoving her head down, and every time she would raise it. Finally, he threatened her with a knife. Speeding down the highway to God knows where, Fiza realized that this was going to end very badly for her. So she struggled with all her might, and she managed to get the passenger door open. The car was doing 85 miles per hour when she jumped to her safety.
You know what, though, at that moment,
That's brave.
Honestly, you're going to die in there with those people, or you're going to die?
Take your chance, right?
Yeah.
About a year after that, Vicki Wendell, the Shermantines' babysitter, had gone to Wesley's home to collect some money, I guess, that he owed her. They were talking, and she expressed that she had an interest in buying a stereo, which, Wesley lured her in the back room, saying that he had one that she could buy.
Mm-hmm.
Once there, he raped her. When Vicki went home and told her husband about the incident, he went straight to Shermantine's residence and confronted Wesley. Shermantine opened the door and punched Mr. Wendell in the face. Police were called and a report was filed, but the police told Vicki not to report the rape because it had just been too long.
Too long
She had
for
waited
what?
too long to
report it?
Yeah, there wouldn't be any evidence left. See, that's what I mean. Things just... I'm not sure if Shermantine's father had any pull there, but...
Something's not right.
Something's weird. Not to report a rape because it was a few hours old. I mean, even if I don't know. And that's my understanding. Maybe it was a couple days. But it's my understanding it happened right after.
But at the same time, even you might not have, you'd still report it.
Even though there's not any evidence, you would report it.
And
you would file something.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes, in case something happens later.
Mm-hmm. Debbie Sanchez was another woman who made claim of being raped by Shermantine. Angela Constanza claimed that Shermantine attempted to rape her, but she got away. Tina Owens also claimed Shermantine raped her and that Herzog had been present but did nothing to stop it. One of the most hair-raising accounts is that of Debbie Brooke. She had been hanging out at the Black Bart bar with Mark Hicks, but later left with 2 men fitting Shermantine and Herzog's description. She'd been drinking heavily and blacked out, and when she woke, she was tied to a bed in the state of undressed.
She was probably drugged.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't black out. She was drugged.
Well, all night long, she was sexually assaulted with a pistol.
Oh.
The next morning, the two men asked if she had remembered what happened to her, and she was smart enough to say no. So they told her to just get dressed, and they drove her home. And could you imagine what would have happened if she said yes, she did remember?
Thank goodness she had the smarts about her.
To say something.
Yes.
To deny that she remembered anything.
Yeah, to not say something.
In February of 1998, a woman named Lisa Pisano, who had known Wes Shermantine for about 10 years, said that Shermantine had attempted to steal her car. He left her on the side of the road for about 20 minutes, returned, grabbed her, and forced her into the passenger side while she screamed for him to let her go. He drove her a few miles down the road, then parked the car and told her, quote, "I'm going to teach you a lesson." Shermantine then pulled out a knife from his coat pocket, held it to her throat, and then raped her, sodomized her, you name it. Horribly, that poor woman. When he was finished, he pushed her to the ground and said, quote, "Listen to the heartbeats of the people I've buried here. Listen to the heartbeats of the families I've buried here." He told her that he would kill her if she went to the police, and quote, "You are damn lucky I'm teaching you a lesson and not someone else." But what a bastard.
No words.
Lisa, being the hero she is, she did tell.
Good.
Shermantine stood trial for the rape of Lisa later in 1998 in Calaveras County, but he was acquitted. Lisa said that lawyers had attacked her character and crucial evidence was lost by investigating officers. Of course, what were you wearing, Lisa? Are you sure you didn't lead him on, Lisa?
Does not matter.
I know.
Matter.
I'm being facetious. It's
I got
horrible.
you.
While Shermantine was waiting for his trial for the rape of Lisa Pisano, he befriended a fellow inmate named Leanne Daniels. After he was acquitted and released, he tracked her down. Not only did he rape her, but he forced her to get a tattoo of his name on her breast so that everybody knew she belonged to him.
My mouth is hanging open right now.
Uh-huh.
What?
After that, she never saw him again.
What?
Crazy.
Well, I guess if somebody's saying, hey, here's the deal, I'm going to kill you, or you're going to do this, I guess you're going to do that. Am I right? Ugh.
Yeah. Now, nobody is entirely certain why some victims were left alive and while others were slaughtered. But 8 months later, in November of 1998, the last speed freak killer victim would go missing. Cindy Vanderheiden was born in November of 1973. She was the daughter of John and Teresa Vanderheiden. Cindy's nickname was Tigger because of her bounciness, and she even had a key ring with the little Disney's character of Tigger, the likeness of Tigger on it. She loved rocking out to Alanis Morissette, and she loved to sing karaoke, girl after my own heart. The 25-year-old green-eyed beauty had aspirations to become a model, so she moved back in with her parents to get back on her feet so she can pursue her dreams. She found a job that she loved, and she bought a new car, brand new car, a 2-door Chevy Cavalier, and she spent a lot of time pampering it. John Vanderheiden owned several bars. He owned the Waterhole in Lodi. Is it Lodi, right?
Lodi,
California?
yeah.
Lodi.
Yes.
The Waterhole in Lodi, the office in Lockford, and the Linden Inn in Linden. Cindy and her sister Kim would often bartend for their dad. On Friday, November 14th, 2008, Cindy decided to go out with her friend Curtis Cox to sing karaoke. The bar they chose to go to was her dad's bar, the Linden Inn. And on that fateful night, Loren and Wes just happened to be there too. Cindy's friend Curtis had seen her talking with Wes and Loren, and so had several other people. When the night was over, Cindy and Curtis left in their respective vehicles. Curtis followed her home to make sure she arrived safely, and then drove himself home. He didn't wait to see if she got into the house, but once she turned in and saw that she was there, he left. Cindy's parents were in bed, and they heard Cindy's car pull in. They kind of woke up a little bit, as you do, and then just it registered that she was home, and they went back to sleep. The next day, Cindy's mom and dad thought that Cindy had already left for work because the car wasn't there. She was already gone. And it wasn't until her dad was out driving around and saw her vehicle parked at the Clements Glen View Cemetery that he realized something was wrong. He went and checked, and the car was unlocked, and all of her belongings were inside. He called Cindy's work, but they had said she'd not shown up that day. Like all the others, the police did not take her disappearance seriously at first, so her parents organized searches of their own. Eventually, a search was done by helicopter and horseback. Cindy's sister Kim returned to California to help with the search, and the family rallied and organized. They got her picture out, they got the word out, but they never did get into any leads. And where does Shermantine and Herzog stand on all this? Well, the authorities were aware that Shermantine had been suspected in the disappearance of Chevy Wheeler, and Detective Little had fears that they were responsible for the disappearance of Raman Armtrout and Joanne Hobson as well. So when Cindy went missing, Shermantine and Herzog were, of course, at the top of their list of persons of interest.
Good.
But other than talking to Cindy, the night she went missing, there was no other evidence that they were responsible. They just knew that Cindy talked to them. Nothing else. Because she went home. Curtis followed her home.
Well, they thought she went home.
Exactly. A year would pass, and then suddenly, finally, there was a break in the case. In mid-January of 1999, Wesley Shermantine defaulted on the loan for his car, and the bank repossessed it. Now, this was the same car that he had been driving the night that Cindy went missing.
Evidence.
Police were able to get access to the car, and they found bloodstains in the bed of the trunk and on the passenger headrest. Bingo! Investigators finally found concrete evidence.
Thank goodness.
When the DNA from those bloodstains matched Cindy Vanderheiden, the San Joaquin Sheriff's Department decided to question Herzog first because they thought he was the easiest to get information from.
Because he is. He's the follower.
Well, they weren't wrong. You are correct. Herzog broke down in the back of the police car on the way to the station, and he started crying. And then he asked, quote, "What can I do to get out of this?"
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Once in the interrogation room, he waived his right to counsel, and boy, he started chirping like a bird. One point during the interview, he said, quote, "I gotta go home and see my wife, kids, I gotta raise them."
Oh.
The fact that he thought he somehow had a right to be with his family while taking so many others from their family.
Thank you.
Just shows you how shallow and self-absorbed he was.
Mm-hmm.
Herzog really believed that if he just pointed the finger at Wesley, he'd be able to go home when the interrogation was over.
He didn't do it. He's telling on somebody else. He was just
all Wesley.
For the ride.
I was just aware. Yep. And so that lifelong friendship between the two dissolved in a matter of hours. Now, in hindsight, it's easy to see that Herzog told the police everything that they wanted to know about the murders. He probably assumed that they already knew everything. Not only did he describe in detail Shermantine killing Cindy, but he informed them Wes also murdered Chevelle Wheeler, Howard King, and Paul Cavanaugh.
He did sing like a canary.
He did.
Holy moly.
With each crime he admitted to, he maintained that all he did was help dispose of the bodies while Shermantine did all the killing.
He just stayed on the side.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's okay.
Only guilty of helping and not talking. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Herzog has always been described as the weaker of the two, the follower, and it's beyond comprehension to think he never participated in any of the killings. His only explanation for why he never reported any of the crimes to the police, or even just quit hanging around Wesley, was that he was afraid of him. I was afraid of him.
I'm sure he was afraid, but I'm sure he could have. There's lots of things you could have done besides hang out with him while he's doing that. And I bet he partook in it himself. Am I right?
When asked by the police, quote, if you had a gun while all this was going on, why didn't you just shoot Wesley? Herzog laughed and said, I wish I had. I'm sure he said it differently, but that was my interpretation.
I got you.
And scene. There is one point during the interrogation where Herzog genuinely looks shaken, and that's when he described the rape and murder of Cindy Vanderheiden. He said that the three of them had met up at the cemetery after leaving the Linden Inn. They'd snorted some lines of crank. Then they drove her to a secluded area, and that's where Shermantine raped her. Cindy cried out for Herzog to help her, but of course he did nothing.
Because he was scared of him.
Mm-hmm.
So he just...
It's his MO. It looks like Shermantine rapes him and Herzog just stands there.
Stands there because he's scared, but he stays there. Mm-hmm.
Then Shermantine slit Cindy's throat, and as she struggled beneath him, Shermantine told her, quote, just let it come natural. Herzog explained that Shermantine had been referring to her death. Let it come natural.
Mm-hmm. Again, Herzog is just scared for his life, just, you know.
The death could be described as anything but natural. Thank you very much. Of course, Shermantine said it was the other way around, that Herzog had been the only one to kill everybody.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I know. When Wesley Shermantine was brought in for questioning, his behavior and demeanor was completely opposite of Herzog's. Wesley was quiet but cautious, whereas Herzog had been very talkative and forthcoming. When asked what his explanation was for why Cindy's blood had been found in his car, he said that there was no assurance that it was her blood.
Oh, uh-huh.
And the police replied, it's 169 million to 1. And the wheels in Shermantine's head started to spin.
Well, he was probably thinking, how do we know it's hers? Because I've killed lots of people and it could be any of them.
Maybe, yeah, who knows? By the time it was all said and done, Wesley Shermantine was charged with the murders of Howard King, Paul Cavanaugh, Chevelle Wheeler, and Cindy Vanderheiden. The authorities searched their homes to make sure they had all the evidence pertinent to these cases and found over $40,000 worth of guns in their houses.
$40,000?
$40,000 worth of guns. That's an arsenal, by the way.
I don't even know.
Wesley Shermantine pleaded not guilty and maintained his innocence throughout and insisted Herzog was the real culprit. Mm-hmm. During his trial, the bastard told Chevelle Wheeler's parents, quote, my parents will know where I'm at when I'm gone, but you'll never know where Chevy is.
And Herzog was the bad one, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, Shermantine says Herzog was the bad one.
That's what I'm saying.
The Wheelers took him at his word and erected a bench in the family cemetery in her memory. Also in the courtroom during the trial was Joan Shelley, the mother of Joanne Hobson. Since neither Shermantine or Herzog had been charged with Hobson's murder or abduction, Joan was not allowed to make any kind of impact statement or even question Shermantine. But she did go to trial looking for some pieces of evidence that maybe would reveal or lead to some sort of closure in her daughter's case. Her instincts paid off because Shermantine looked at her directly and said, quote, your daughter had a date that night. And that's a fact that had never been released to the public. So, little side note here, Dighton Lewis Little, the officer that told Joan Shelley to keep the fact that her daughter Joanne had gone out on a date the night she went missing, said, don't tell anybody, keep it to yourself. He was shot and killed in 1989 while serving a narcotics warrant. Little had told Joanne's sister Michelle that he knew Shermantine and Herzog were responsible for Chevy Wheeler's disappearance as well as Robin's murder and Joanne's disappearance, but he just couldn't prove it. The fact that he didn't live long enough to do and see so many things is criminal. And maybe if he had lived, the speed freight killers would have been caught much sooner. At any rate, Wesley Howard Shermantine Jr. was found guilty of murdering all four, King, Cavanaugh, Wheeler, and Vanderheiden. Prosecutors offered to take the death penalty off the table if Shermantine would agree to disclose the locations of the bodies. And Wesley, being the ever so charming man that he is, his response was he'll do it if he got the $20,000 in reward money. There had been reward. There was reward. The families considered that blood money and refused to make that deal. So Shermantine was sentenced to death and sits on death row to this day. Now, Herzog was charged with 5 counts of murder in 1999 for Cindy Vanderheiden, Henry Howell, Paul Kavanaugh, Howard King, and Robin Armont. In 2001, the jury found him guilty of the murders of Vanderheiden, Kavanaugh, and King, and lesser charge of accessory to murder in the Howell case, and acquitted him on the murder of Robin Armtrout. Herzog was given a 78-year sentence, but what followed next was like something out of a Hollywood movie. No joke. Loren Herzog decided to fight back, and he went to appeals, and the appeals court overturned all of Herzog's convictions in August of 2004, after ruling that 3 of Herzog's 4 confessions were coerced. Now, apparently, when Herzog first was arrested, he had waited 4 days for an arraignment, which is a violation of his rights. He was also not given proper food or rest during that time. In the case of Cindy Vanderheiden, a retrial was ordered, but Herzog, not wanting to chance another trial, took a plea bargain. Herzog pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and furnishing the meth in the Vanderheiden case, and also being an accessory to the murder of Kavanaugh, King, and Howell cases. Accordingly, Herzog's sentence was reduced to 14 years with credit for 6 years served.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
No.
With credit off his sentence for good behavior, Herzog was released on parole in 2010. Problem now was nobody wanted him, and he clearly wasn't safe to be released into the general public. So he was transferred to Laysan County to live in a mobile home that was on the prison grounds in the middle of a desert. He had to wear a GPS monitor, and he was allowed to come and go as he pleased, but he had to check in and out every time he came and went. And the residents of the county were extremely angry because
Could you imagine?
I know.
Like your 16, 17-year-old kid goes to Walmart. I'd be like...
Or works at Walmart.
Ugh.
Right. I know. Well, they were mad because not only was he a violent offender living in their county, but he couldn't hold down a job, so he was living on their dime. They were paying for it all. So enter a larger-than-life bounty hunter by the name of Leonard...
Dog?
You'd think it's dog. No.
Sorry.
Leonard Padillo. 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 Wearing his trademark black cowboy hat, he offered Shermantine $33,000 to lead investigators to the bodies of their victims. And of course, Shermantine said, heck yeah. He was just mostly kind of pissed that Herzog was free. So he agreed to do it.
I would be too, honestly. Like he knows more. He knows what went on.
Oh, yeah, he does. Padillo made a call to Herzog on the phone January 17th, 2012, and told him, quote, "Get a lawyer. Wes gave us the burial sites. You're going to go back to prison."
Well, he should.
Mm-hmm. Loren Herzog committed suicide later that day, having written a note that said, quote, "Tell my family I love them." His autopsy revealed that he had no drugs in his system at the time of death. He was covered in disturbing tattoos, among the typical inkings of skulls and flames and panthers. There were several phrases tattooed on his body. One said, and I'm going to say this wrong because it's German, Spurdenverwüstung.
I took German in high school. I have no idea what that means. I have no idea.
It's German for marks of devastation. Another on his foot was a play on words. It read, "I made the devil do it." And another, "Made and fueled by hate, restrained by reality."
He wasn't restrained. He did what
charming.
He wanted.
He and Shermantine are charming chaps. Wesley Shermantine drew 5 maps that are supposedly the whereabouts of their victims, although Wesley still insisted that they were all Herzog's victims. He even went so far as to label the places on the map things like Loren's Boneyard and Loren's Play Area. It's like naming them after Loren was proof that he, in fact, was the perpetrator. In San Andreas, Calaveras County, where Wesley Shermantine's family had formerly owned property, one of the maps and cadaver dogs led investigators to the remains of Chevy Wheeler in a shallow grave. Cindy Vanderheiden was unearthed in a ravine just a short distance away. However, Loren's Boneyard is where the bodies were revealed that the speed freak killers were never charged with murdering. Loren would eventually write letters to a Stockton journalist, the bounty hunter, and even Senator Kathleen Galgiani that hinted that a number of victims could be as high as 72. All, according to him, were Herzog's victims. Mm-hmm. So on that February day when the San Joaquin Sheriff's Department decided to go forward with their dig of the well on Flood Road, 4 bodies were found. Detective Shanda Bissett had taken Joanne Hobson's mother and sister to the well dig. Joan Shelley said that Detective Bassett was convinced that they would find her daughter's remains there. But when Joan saw the backhoe, she started to panic. Surely they weren't going to dig up her daughter's remains with a giant backhoe, right? Detective Bassett assured her that once they found the bones, that they would stop and do a proper forensic dig. Can you guess what happened?
There's going to be a bunch of bones there. Mm-hmm.
According to crimesceneinvestigator.net, quote, the ground surface should be examined for evidence before being slowly and carefully removed. In some cases, especially those of mass graves, heavy equipment like a backhoe may be used initially to remove the topsoil, with a monitor to watch carefully for evidence or remains exposed by the machinery. Soil remover may then be probed by careful use of picks and shovel and finally with trowels and brushes. But that's not what happened. Joan Shelley and her daughter Michelle went home, trusting that Joanne Hobson's remains would be treated with respect and dignity and properly retrieved. Instead, they turned on the news and they saw her bones falling from the claw of the backhoe.
Traumatic. That's awful.
Horrible. In addition to the remains of Joanne Hobson were those of Kimberly Billy and an unidentified woman who apparently had been pregnant, as a fetus was also discovered among the remains. To this day, the woman described as mixed race has never been identified, and subsequently, neither has the fetus. The FBI was called in response to Sheriff Steve Moore's poor handling of the retrieval of the remains. Agent Jeffrey Rennick said that dinosaurs got treated with more respect than the victims in that well.
That is exactly what I was just thinking. Like the brush and how they like every little dirt. I was just thinking that.
It's horrible. Joan Shelley said it felt as though they had murdered her daughter all over again. She eventually sued the sheriff's department, stating that the sheriff's office had pulverized her daughter's remains. And after 4 years, she won her case. When Miss Shelley received her daughter's bones, she had them photographed. There were 3 legs and 3 arms. Unfortunately, Kimberly Billy's family had already cremated her, so there's no way to retrieve all of Joanne's bones. They didn't even properly try to separate the remains. Since 2012, several victims' families and elected officials have alleged that the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office interfered with and deliberately hampered the continued search for additional possible victims of Shermantine and Herzog. In 2010, Shermantine wrote a letter to California Senator Kathleen Galgiani, whose cousin, 19-year-old Dina Mcclung, disappeared in 1981. The letter revealed other locations of remains of additional victims. In 2012, Galgiani turned the letter over to law enforcement and later alleged that missing person records related to the Speed Freak killer's case had been deleted, hampering further investigation. When Joan Shelley filed her lawsuit against the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office, a retired FBI agent corroborated her claims, alleging that the SJCSO deliberately used a backhoe to dig up remains, mingling them to prevent identification so that the absence of certain files would not be discovered.
Why?
Something's fishy going up there in the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office, I guess.
Case closed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wouldn't they rather have that and no?
We've got somebody to admit that at least 72 people have been killed, but let's delete all this stuff, files.
Maybe they don't want to look guilty that they didn't do.
Or somebody was covering up somebody.
Yes.
Something. Mm-hmm. Some even allege that the sheriff's office went so far as to deliberately dig in spots that were not locations given by Shermantine so that they could claim that he was leading them on a wild goose chase and that they needed to stop investigating. To this day, several of the places Shermantine told investigators to dig, they've not been excavated. Shermantine at one point even alleged that Herzog had trained a third speed freak killer, Jason Jones.
Trained? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of like, this is what we do here, son. Hey, son, this is what we do here.
Yeah.
Jason Jones, a former Linden resident, often appears in Wesley's letter and was a witness at the trial. In a letter to Fox 40 dated March 1st, 2012, Shermantine claimed to have warned Jason Jones to leave the country before more sites could be excavated. There are so many missing people thought to have been victims of the speed freak killers. Tracy Melton was last seen at a bar with Shermantine in 1988. Her femur was found off Halt Road in Stockton. And according to her sister Sharon, it took 9 months from the time the authorities learned the identity of the femur to the time the family was informed. 9 months. When she inquired as to why it took so long for her to be informed, she was told Tracy had just slipped through the cracks. Indeed, no search for the rest of her remains were ever done. Other possible victims, Terry Ann Forcher, last seen in Reno, Nevada, when Shermantine and Herzog were there. Gail Marks, who disappeared from Stockton in 1988. Donald Ray Sadberry, and Philip Lloyd Martin. Frustratingly, the case of the speed freak killers is one of systematic poverty, systematic drug use, unchecked criminal activity, victim blaming, corruption, lazy investigation, and the belief that just runaway girls aren't worth an immediate investigation.
Or somebody else is working and this is an easy way to, this must belong to them. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And at least 3 of the missing girls lived within blocks of each other. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand why Shermantine and Herzog weren't, if they were considered suspects, why weren't they put under surveillance? Why does no one care about runaways? Let's put it that way. Why? Why? I don't understand.
Nor do I, my friend.
In the case of Lisa Pisano, she mustered up the courage to accuse her violator. Her character was questioned more than Shermantine's. Lisa said her testimony that if the authorities had listened, if the jury had listened and put Shermantine behind bars for the brutal assault against her, at least Cindy Vanderheiden would still be alive. But that's all we have in this case, just a bunch of if-onlys. In 2018, the new sheriff said the investigation of the speed freak killers had been reopened, but no further sites have been dug and no more victims have been recovered. And one of the ballsiest moves ever, bounty hunter Leonard Padillo never paid Shermantine that $33,000.
Good.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't deserve it. What's he going to do with it?
What are you going to do?
Exactly.
Hit me?
So,
no.
But that's all we have for the speed freak killers. If you do want a very in-depth speed freak killer, you can listen to the podcast called Foul Play by Shane Waters. He has Shane, yeah. He has a 20-part series called The Maps. And I believe it was published in April of 2020. So go listen to that. He also, if you haven't listened, he does a lot of coverage on the case of Sister Catherine Sesnick, which you know, if you don't, or it's featured on Netflix. The series is called The Keepers. Really good series. The co-host for that is Gemma Hoskins, who was involved in the case. Actually, she was a student of Sister Catherine's. Gemma wrote about the murder, and she was also in the documentary.
Featured, big time.
She was featured, I should say that. Yes, she was featured. Yeah. Amazing woman. Great documentary. Great podcast. Seriously, check out Foul Play, The Maps. Shane does a great job on it. And also, today, before we did this, Paula Zahn has a episode on this. It's season 11, episode 5. But I was watching this, and at the very end, the sister's talking about how, you know, the closure and all this kind of stuff. And they show this black and white picture of Cindy. And it's when Cindy's younger, and it's just like half of her face or maybe 3/4 of her face. And I had to play it back 3 times because they photoshopped. They put a little tiny tear that runs down Cindy's eye.
No, they did not.
Down her cheek. It did. At first, I thought there was something on my screen, if there was dust, because I've been cleaning. but I watched it 3 times, and they did.
Why would they
put
do
like
that?
this little tiny dot. I mean, it's teeny tiny dot, and it goes down like a tear on that picture, on the picture of Cindy's face. It made me laugh, and I'm thinking, why are they trying to evoke more drama, something? But at first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. I thought it was dust, and sure enough, they manipulated it to make it look like there's a tear going down her face.
Not cool.
So check it out. It's like in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the episode.
Now I'm going to have to go look.
I know. You can find it on Discovery Plus, On the Case with Paula Zahn, Season 11, Episode 5.
Well, that was I swear, people are insane. I say that all the time, but they really are.
These two, they were brutal.
Well, and
they
I think
were
too,
psychotic.
And we've talked about how like 2 people separately would never do evil things. Then they meet each other.
I think Wesley would.
But I'm saying it's I don't know though. I think sometimes it's the little one and impressing them. It's like the forces come together, and I just like think Loren, of Columbine.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think Loren Herzog had it in him, but it took Wesley to bring it out. Since it was Wesley doing that, and they were best friends, since if Wesley's doing it, I should do it too. I kind of like it. But it's just, there's no words to describe. Like, I always kind of knew about the speed freak killers, but it wasn't until recently that you're just like...
Drugs are bad. There you go.
They are. And, like, all these people had drug problems. They all did lines. I mean... Well,
yeah. And it makes you vulnerable and makes you go to places you would never be.
Right. And
selling your body or
one of Cindy was supposedly in recovery. She had a problem with drugs, and she was turning a new leaf and going to do the modeling, and she was living with her folks, and she was on the straight and narrow. And the Paula Zahn case, they said that the minute Cindy got in the car, she knew she was screwed. She knew that,
something was not right.
She knew it wasn't right, but it was too late. Yeah,
I'd bail out at 80 miles per hour.
Yeah, exactly. What a hero.
I think I'd almost rather die
took a lot of guts
that way than to be tortured and go on for days. Who knows?
Yes. I don't know. Very
that
strange.
Was something else, let me tell you.
It was. So that's the speed freak killers. The assholes galore. I mean, they're beyond assholes. I can't even.
And I love how they blamed each other.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Minute, and I loved how the minute Loren got in the car, he's just like, "What do I have to do to get out of this?"
Yeah, but
and asshole, you're not going to get off easy.
The stupidness that he thought he could get out. Here, I'm going to point the. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
I'm going to blame it all on Wesley, and then I'm going to be home in time for dinner because I got to take care of my kids
and my wife.
Son of a bitch, should have thought about that
with the multitude of people you killed.
14 years ago. Yeah, unreal. Well, but definitely listen to Foul Play with Shane Waters. It's pretty good. I listened to the first episode, and I'm going to go back and listen to the rest. But Shane always does a great job.
Well, Jen, that was stupendous.
Amazing.
I'm so happy you had fun on your vacation.
I'm glad I did too. We'll find out next week, folks, how I really had fun when Jen in the future comes to tell us what happened.
Yeah, funny. All right. Until next time, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. Today's episode was researched and written by me, Jen. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberpodVHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/ourtruecrimepodcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya. Wesley Jr. even got a brand new car when he turned 16, and the first thing he did was take his lifelong friend, Loren Herzog, for a ride. That sounds like us. I remember when you first got your car.
I did. It was the
I rode in it. Isn't that when you've got your first speeding ticket too?
I got my first speeding ticket 3 days after I got my car.
There you go.
And I was singing, I want to be an Air Force Ranger.
Yep,
I was there. My life in danger.
I was there.
Then I got pulled over.
Mm-hmm. First day I got my license, I had a pole at A&W.
You sure did.
I did. Anyway, back to the story.
Thank God the pole was yellow and the car was yellow, so it took your mom a couple days to catch on.
A couple years. I don't even think she knows to this day. When Raymond Wheeler caught sight of Wesley Shermantine's vehicle, when Raymond Wheeler caught sight of the gun in Wesley Shermantine, motherfucker.
Okay.
When Raymond Wheeler,
say it again.
I need a beer.
You're going to need one on Friday, that's for sure. All right. Apparently, I can't have one because I can't go to your house. Whatever.